I have my life back.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back to Hanging Out with Successful Bar Exam Takers. And I have one of my really favorite students from the last couple of years. Brian Montague is with us today. And Brian, you're talking to us from the Panhandle in Florida, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and you are a passing Florida bar taker, first try in February 2019.
Correct.
Yeah, and that's the least number of words I've ever heard out of your mouth, ever.
Well, it won't last.
Okay, good. We've had quite a role, you and I, and sort of working through this process, and it's been an interesting journey. It's had some obviously some high points, but some low points too, some very difficult times. And I'm really anxious and appreciate you being willing to tell your story today, because I know that a lot of people like you, you're a licensed attorney in Mississippi, right? And
Yes.
There are a lot of people who come from other jurisdictions to take the Florida bar, and they've got a variety of things going on in their lives. They've got a practice, they've got family, they've got other obligations, and it's a challenging process. And you really felt the full weight of that challenge as you studied, and you persevered through it. And so I'm just excited to have you here. So that's more talking than I should do. I want to turn it over to you and just ask you to sort of share with our audience a little bit of your backstory and your history and how you came to be taking the Florida bar.
Well, I will try to keep it a little brief, but at the same time, tell my story as you asked me to do. I've been practicing in Mississippi for almost 35 years, and I had not thought back upon the fact until completing the Florida bar examination that during that time I interrupted my practice 4 times. Once when I left my father's firm to become a solo practitioner, once when I was called to military active duty in 2004, a third time when I was called to active duty to go to Iraq in 2009, and then the 4th time was when my wife and I, after we had lost my parents at separate times in 2013, and for other reasons, we had always aspired to come to Florida. So we did. We came down here a few years ago, and it was, and as you remember from spending time in this area yourself, it's just a beautiful part of the world. Even though I told somebody the other day, I said, if anybody asks how it is in Northwest Florida, tell them it's horrible.
Yeah, stay out.
Yeah, stay out. Come visit, but just don't stay. Any case, so those were the 4 interruptions. And incident to the last one, I thought that, and my wife thought that it would be good to try to remain productive. And I still represent Mississippi clients here and there, but it just seemed like a natural segue to try to augment that with Florida activity. So that's what inspired me to take the bar at age 60.
Yeah, and 35 years from a first bar exam is a really challenging task. I mean, just getting back into the study. And you originally enrolled with us to take the bar, and we had a great conversation. And sometime shortly after that, you contacted me because there was a crisis in your family, right?
Yes, that is correct. My father raised 3 sons, all of whom became lawyers. He used to characterize it as a genetic defect. But in any case, we did. And the middle of the 3 of us, Dixon Montague, was a highly accomplished lawyer with Vincent Elkins in Houston. In fact, he at one time had attained the largest eminent domain verdict in Texas state eminent domain jurisprudence history. And he was just really an outstanding lawyer with that firm. And we lost him to glioblastoma last year in 2018. And that was challenging. He and I were close, but I was, as I had mentioned to you a number of times, he was absolutely, as was our father, by the way, whose story is also worth recounting. But Dixon was absolutely tenacious, a highly skilled trial lawyer, and dad was the same. Dad contracted polio 6 months before the Salk vaccine became commercially available. Prior to which he was a cross-country athlete and worked as a field engineer in Midland, Texas. But after that, he had a law degree in his hip pocket. He used it to return to Mississippi and became a very well-respected, ethical, committed small-town lawyer. And both of those, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to share this, but both of those, the memories of both my brother and my father were true sources of inspiration as I went through the grind of studying for this bar exam.
Yeah, and it's a testimony to their memory that you did a great deal of this, I think, very cognizant and very aware of the legacy that they had created for you. And when you had first contacted me, you'd started your studies, and then your brother's diagnosis became more dire, and you made the conscious decision at that point that that was going to come first, and you were going to set aside studying for the bar, even though you were just beginning to get a little bit of momentum, and it felt like, oh, you know, you're ready to do it. And I thought that it was not only a kind thing for your family, but it was a very selfless act on your part, because it takes a lot of momentum to get started when you're doing something like studying for this big test, and you're just trying to get going, and suddenly you stop. And the question then in our minds typically is going to be, well, will that student come back? Will they be able to return and start this process again? And you did. And you came back to the study. Certainly, I know you were saddened, but I also know that there was this sense of purpose in what you were doing. You didn't have to become a lawyer in Florida. You have a very successful practice in Mississippi. You are well respected. And I think this is an interesting point, because sometimes people think that bar takers are all desperate. And sometimes, you're doing it because it's just the next thing to do, but sometimes you do it because there's really a bigger purpose out there. And that was pretty evident with you from the beginning, Brian. So we come to this point where you're now saying, all right, I am now here and ready to study. And you really threw yourself into your studies once you began, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. And I would be the first to say that compared to the challenges confronted by a lot of Celebration Bar Review students, I had the relative luxury of, I still represented clients here and there, but I had the luxury of virtually uninterrupted opportunity to study. And I used every bit of it, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah. When you started the process, it was challenging for you to get back into the thought of studying. And I know it was unsettling a little bit, wasn't it, to be out of your comfort zone and having to do different things. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people in my shoes who have gone through your course could probably tell similar stories of how aggravating it is to hear your neighbors and friends say, well, why do you have to study for the bar? I mean, you've been practicing all your adult life. And I just want to choke and say, it's not quite like that.
Right.
But in any case, yeah, I was committed to it.
You were studying, really, you took your bar study like it was a regular job. You were working on it every day, and you had a very disciplined approach to the study. In fact, one of the more disciplined students I thought we had in terms of just following through and doing all of the assignments. What would you say for you was the most challenging part of getting back into the study after that many years?
Resolving to develop a routine, and then once you develop it, adhering to it. And but those, however simple those two steps sound, were for me incredibly important. And once I executed those things, and used your study guide, which I followed to the letter, everything worked out.
Yeah. And one of the big challenges, I think one of the interesting things for me, you enrolled in the personal coaching plan. So you and I talked about your writing. Sometimes we yelled about your writing. Sometimes we, came to virtual fisticuffs over it. Because part of what we were trying to do was to change some of what you were used to doing, and then also getting you comfortable with some of the things that were natural skills, but which you had really sort of sublimated and put away in order to do what you thought you were supposed to do in the writing. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think sometimes people can get the impression that it's all sweetness and light, easy, and everything goes smoothly. But for you, learning to write in the style that we were asking was a major, major challenge, wasn't it?
True. And when you have been practicing for a long time, a practice which included writing a lot of briefs, the instinct is to say, well, why do I need somebody to tell me how to write? Because I've been doing it all of my adult life. And as you implied, I resisted. I was not immediately convinced of the merit of the FLA writing style, but I became convinced. And I became convinced when I tried, as you were alluding to compare my old writing, even research memo writing styles with the FLA style. And I was convinced in speaking with you and in trying my method that FLA really works, and it flows beautifully, and it really is conducive to putting your thoughts and analysis down on paper.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, what Brian's referring to is we use a writing style called Fact Law Application, or FLA. And as we started out in the course, and you struggled with it, as most people do, because it is different than certainly IRAC, issue rule application, conclusion writing, or brief writing, or some other things that you might do in practice. You had an interesting approach, which was that you had sort of this hybrid that you had developed out of all of these different pieces. And from my standpoint as a teacher, it was really an interesting opportunity, because I have a great deal of respect for you and for your expertise and your ability. And I did something that I don't always do, or don't often do, with a student, which was to say, okay, why don't you go ahead and try your writing style, write some essays the way that you think they should be, and then let's look at them and compare them to the FLA writing style. And my sense was, if Brian could see what he's doing and put it up against this other writing style, I think he'll believe at the end that this is the right way to go. But I trusted you enough to believe that you would find the right piece for you. And so we went that direction, and you were gracious enough to go ahead and try. It was a lot of extra work, frankly, for you to do this extra writing, but you did it. And what was that like for you to sort of do your writing and then compare it and go back and forth for a while?
Seeming to speak from a script here, but I can truthfully say that when I tried my old method, which was a method I learned in law school decades ago, facts, issues, conclusions, legal reasoning. And so I said, that's the way I'm used to writing. Let me try that. And as you just mentioned, we tried the same essay using that format and then using FLA. And more, I became very, not only used to, but convinced of the merit of FLA. And it's something that I'm now a fervent convert for.
Yeah, and you passed the exam first try, and you passed both sections, Florida and the multi-state. So it wasn't that there was a deficit, of course, in any part. What would you say to somebody who is going through that struggle of trying to learn how to write differently than they did in law school, based on your experience? How would you help them make the transition?
First, I hope they make it more easily than I did. And if they're not as stubborn as I am, they probably will. Second, it sounds like an infomercial maybe, but all I can say is try it, it works. And it is an approach to writing that makes putting your thoughts down, comparing arguments, weaker versus stronger, and assessing the stronger argument and explaining why the stronger argument works, is perfectly suited to that dynamic. And the examiner must have liked it enough to pass me. So
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think people will appreciate that it's hard to do at first, and it takes some time. As you got more comfortable with the writing style, your writing clearly got stronger and stronger. You were able to focus more on the substance, the law behind it. And really, by the end of the practice period, you were turning out very successful essays very consistently, and really getting in and delving into the underlying law. And of course, there's some very unique state-specific material in Florida. I mean, there's Florida Constitution, and there's Florida trusts, and there's Florida domestic relations, and I mean, there's a lot there. And I think at moments there you were probably thinking to yourself, "What have I done to myself? Why am I, digging into all of this?" Right?
yeah, no, but it was, one of the first conversations you and I had was one where I was not fully on board with the grind of studying for the Florida bar. But one of the other reasons I wanted to do it is just for the academic exercise. And I learned a lot. I don't know how much of it I'll retain. I hope some, but I learned a lot, and that was one of the reasons I did it.
Yeah, and I thought that of all the students that I worked with in the last term, you might have been the one that was most interested in the academic substantive material. We had some great conversations that were probably off book, where we went deeper on some things, but the joy of just learning, which I think is a really wonderful thing. I mean, sometimes, you're young relative to me, but it's a very frustrating thing sometimes when people look at people of a certain age and they assume that our brains have atrophied and that we're no longer capable of rational, unique thought or deeper thought or even an opinion, much less a seat at the better tables along 30A. But the reality is that I thought you really enjoyed that part of the process. And I think for a lot of practitioners, sometimes it's just a real pleasure to get out of the grind of daily practice and be able to actually think about the law and think about some concepts. And you had some great insights about, why do you do these things? And I'd be like, dang, I don't really know. I'm not really sure why we do it that way, because that's what we do, right? So I think that was really an interesting part of the work. What about the multi-state exam? What did that feel like to you coming back and studying for that?
Well, the one thing that I come away from that part of the effort committed or very certain of is that repetition is, at least for me, was the key. The more multiple choice practice questions I went over, the better I got. And I think on that part of the Florida exam, I ended up with a 150, which isn't bad.
Great score, yeah.
And, it's not record breaking by any stretch, but I think it's as high as I ever scored in a practice situation. And I think that the practice exams were pivotal to my being comfortable with that part of it.
Yeah, and I think that you took the practice part really seriously. You worked at it. What kind of note taking did you do on multi-states? Did you use mind maps, or were you just taking notes?
Both. I took my notes in mind map format. I ended up using a feature of mind map that allows you to convert the dynamic, the mind map to conventional linear format.
Right, and I remember that. Yeah, and it was really interesting. We hadn't seen anybody do that before, and you did it. And why was that helpful for you?
It was just a format I was used to. I ended up making a 26 or however many tab notebook, 3-ring binder notebook. I studied in the last week or two before the exam. I studied exclusively from the notebook that I had created, and I did something else that you had recommended to your students, and that is to record from your mind map products or whatever products they create. And so driving down to Tampa from here, and while I was in Tampa, I ended up listening to my recordings on my cell phone, and that was very effective. So I commend you for the tools that you offer to students that helps us learn. And it's
Yeah, I really like mind maps. I think they're a great way to take notes. And I was really excited when you discovered this technique in MindMeister, I think it was, the software, where you could literally take the notes and convert them into something that made sense for you. And I thought that that was, as we've been working with mind maps over the last few years, it's been interesting to see how that's developed. And I thought you actually kind of expanded our view of how a mind map could be presented and worked through. So that was exciting to see. And I knew you were working it and dealing with it and really engaged with the material in a deeper way than typically we do when we just take notes, right? And then the notes disappear. They go up into ether.
Yeah, no, I use my notes extensively. And like I say, for the last probably couple of weeks before the exam, that was except for multiple choice, which I continued to do practice exams concerning. But except for that, my go-to resources were my outline that I prepared and my audio recordings of my outlines.
That's great. Now, you also participated in the group coaching calls that we did, in addition to working with me, personal coaching. Can you talk a little bit about what group coaching meant to you?
Yeah, I thought that's a great format. First of all, it's easy to use. Kelly, who was my group coaching mentor, was wonderful. She was very engaging. She invited conversations and exchanges. And, there are not too many, for better or worse, there are not too many 60-year-olds taking the bar exam, but there's some. And it was interesting to compare experiences with people, in our case, all over the planet. A gentleman from Saudi Arabia, another from Africa, if I recall correctly. In any case, it was a international group, and I must say, speaking of international, how impressed I was with the students who were not native English speakers, who overcame that and still succeeded. That's quite inspirational.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I think the group coaching is one of the great things that we get to do, because it helps you feel less isolated. And certainly you get to share your expertise and get the expertise of other people. Kelly Kildam, that you're referring to, one of our staff members, the head of our group coaching program. We've got some other group coaches. And of course, they get very invested and in the results. And when the results came out in Florida, Kelly was just beside herself, jumping up and down for you. She was so excited. So that was a great thing. So you got to Tampa to take the exam. It's been a while since you've been in a bar exam, obviously. And I know you had lots of questions about how's the process going to work, and what do they let me bring in, and what can I do, and lots of the logistics kinds of things. Talk a little bit, if you would, about what the Florida bar is like, because I think sometimes people think I exaggerate about it, but
well, no, you don't. As I was overwhelmed by the humanity in February 2019, I learned that the size of the crowd of which I was a part is a lot smaller than the July taking crowd, which surprised me. I think, if memory serves me, I was one of about 1,700 bar takers in February, something like that.
That's right, 1,700, yeah.
It was very well run, in my opinion. The only criticism I have is that as the exam takers are filing through the matrix of what do you call them? Scanners, the metal detectors.
Right.
After you do that, they herd you like cattle into this very compressed area outside the examination room, and you were just jammed in there like sardines. And that was not very fun. But as soon as they released us into the cavernous room, it was very liberating. And so we all scurried to our tables, and we were, this room is maybe as big as 3 football fields. And we're each sitting there 2 to a table with our exam numbers where we're supposed to be seated. And it was very well marked. I will say this, they didn't tell us until the night before, be sure you have an extension cord that's at least 8 feet long. Well, thankfully, I had bought one I don't know why I thought to do this, but I did. I had bought one just the day before, but for which I would have really been in a pickle. The distance from the plug-ins to the laptops takes every inch of an 8-foot cord. I had like 16 feet or something. But my point is simply that if I had to say to future takers what to be sure to do, be sure you bring a long extension cord. As far as the logistics, I thought it was very professionally run. If you had questions about technology, I had one hiccup trying to get started with the exam portion that first morning. They had the whoever supplies the platform on which you take the essay.
Yeah, Exemplify. Yeah.
Thank you. They had all their representatives there. And as soon as you raise your hand, they'd come to you, help you. And they had, of course, they had tons of monitors who were there both to help you and to watch you. And
Yeah.
It was, I thought it was as good an atmosphere as you could hope for under those circumstances.
That's great. Well, I want to hear, I mean, you come back from the exam and of course you go back to your life and you've got plenty to do. So it doesn't take real long to get Florida results back, about 6 weeks after the exam. So what's it like waiting to get results and results day itself?
Well, I must say that after I took the exam, I was relatively confident that I had passed. I felt that way. And then over the weeks between then and receiving the results, I said, hey, maybe I didn't. Maybe there's something I missed. And so I did go through episodes where I began to have doubts. But by the time the results came, I wasn't surprised, but I was obviously pleased. And I say again, I really have become a believer in the curriculum that y'all have developed, your team and you have developed, and the merit of following it. It really worked for me.
Oh, that's great. I'm so pleased for you. And I know for a while, it felt like your life was on hold, right? I mean, so much was going on and so much happening. And I know you've heard me talk about the fact that our philosophy here is that I have my life back. And we've made it something of a tradition on these videos to do a Dave Ramsey-like countdown and to ask you to share that mantra for other people. So I'm going to embarrass you now and make you do that. And we're going to count down, 3, 2, 1. And I would love you to just, as loud or soft as you want, to just share with us that I have my life back. Are you okay? Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1.
I have my life back.
Perfect. And and I want to share one other piece of information with Brian about Brian. Brian is like me, afflicted with a disease called the New Orleans Saints football team. Unfortunately, he's got an additional problem, which is that his son, I believe, is a logistics manager for I can't even say their names, but those people that play up in Georgia. And that had to be just excruciating as the season was going on and you were studying and your son is with the other team and the season that's happening. And I thought it was very impressive the way you just kept your focus all the way through the season and just kept studying for the bar.
Let me say that my younger son, Austin, was a seasonal logistics intern with the Atlanta Falcons. I grew up bleeding black and gold Saints colors, but blood is thicker than water. So once Austin was honored with that position, I became a supporter of everything he was doing. And I must say, that's an impressive organization. They really are.
Yeah. And it's fun to be able to sort of return to all of that and see what's going on. And I thought it was really wonderful the way that you kept your work, life, family balance through all this. You worked really hard on the bar, but we had conversations about Austin and things that were going on with your family. We obviously talked about your brother and your dad. I think that finding that balance it's a rare person that can hold all of those pieces in good measure at the same time. It's certainly one of the reasons that you're a successful lawyer. But I was enriched by our conversations and our friendship. And I know that our audience is enriched by hearing your stories of what happened on the bar. So often I talk to students who have these great stories in which they failed multiple times and then come back and pass. And that is terrific. But I think sometimes we don't give quite enough credence or credit to the people like you that come in and quietly just go about their work and pass the first time through. The pass rate in Florida is very low. Not a lot of people pass on the first try, and not a lot of practicing attorneys from out of state pass on their first try. I mean, it's less than 50%. So this is really quite an accomplishment for you. And I'm sure that you enjoy that, but also I hope you're proud of the accomplishment, because it was not a small thing.
Well, I appreciate that. And I thank Kelly, you, June, all of you at Celebration Bar. Y'all do a wonderful job, and I was certainly a beneficiary.
Well, thank you. And, to our audience, thanks for being with us. I hope you've enjoyed talking with Brian. I can tell you that if you're ever up on 30A and you see a, very successful lawyer strolling along the beach, it's probably this guy. Thanks for being with us, Brian. Thank you to all of us in our audience, and we're going to say bye now.